Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet this adorable flower tote bag. So this bag is basically just made up of a lot of these flower granny squares. So we're basically just going to make 18 of these squares and then sew them together to make the bag. So first I'm going to show you guys how to make a square. To make each square, you're going to need 4 colors. So one for the center, the petals, this outside part, and the border. And then obviously you'll need a crochet hook. I'm using a size 2.0 hook for this project, but you can honestly use any size. I just like using the 2.0 because when I use bigger ones, the squares end up a little too big. And yeah, now we can start with the center of the flower. So grab your first color and make a magic circle. And we're going to put 8 single crochets in this circle. So insert your hook, 1 single crochet, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can also tighten it to make it easier. 7 and 8. And once you have 8 single crochets, you can just pull your magic circle tight. And now we're going to slip stitch into this first stitch that we made. And that's the first round. To start the next round, we're going to chain 3. And now we're going to insert a double crochet in the stitch we just slip stitched into. And then yarn over, and we're going to put 2 double crochets in the next stitch. So 1 and 2. And now we're just going to keep putting 2 double crochets in each stitch all the way around. So double crochet 1 and 2, and do this all the way around until you end up with 16 double crochets. And once you have the 16 double crochets, we're going to slip stitch into that third chain that we made. So just slip stitch on that chain. And now we can just fasten off here. And now we can move on to the next color. I'm going to be using blue for the petals, so I just grab my blue yarn and insert your hook into any of these stitches around. I'm going to go into this one and then grab your yarn tail and just pull up a loop and chain 3. And now we're going to be making 3 double crochets in every other stitch. So this one counts as our first one. So in the same stitch, we're just going to make 2 more. So that's 3 double crochets. And now chain 1, yarn over, and we're going to skip this next stitch and go into this one. So go into this next stitch, and I recommend bringing these tails along with you so you don't have to weave them in later, and just crochet over them. So 3 double crochets in that stitch, and then chain 1 again, and skip this one and go into the next one. And we're just going to keep doing 3 double crochets and a chain 1 in every other stitch all the way around. So once you have 8 of these little, I guess, start to our petals, we're just going to slip stitch into the third chain that we made to end the row. And now don't fasten off, just pull up this loop a little bit so it doesn't come out. And now we're going to grab the color that we're going to use for our background. So basically just grab this color. I'm going to be using pink, so I'm going to start by tying a slip knot on my hook. And then we're going to yarn over, and you can go into any of these stitches around the center, but I'm going to do this one. So insert your hook in the stitch in between this gap and make a double crochet. So now we have this double crochet, and you can pull the tail to tighten it. And once you have this double crochet, we're going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, yarn over, and we're going to go into the next one. And always make sure that this loop and the tail are in the front and they don't get stuck back here, because when we crochet around, if they get trapped back here, you'll have to redo the row. So make sure to keep them in the front. So we're going to yarn over, go into this next stitch, and make a double crochet like that. And now we're going to chain 4 again, yarn over, make sure that this is in the front, and make a double crochet in the next one. Now chain 4, and we're just going to do that all the way around. So go into all 8 of these stitches and chain 4. And now once you're done with this last one, chain 4 and then slip stitch into that first double crochet that we made. And yeah, now we can just pull this loop like we did with the other color, and we're going to go back to our petal color. Now to start the next round, chain 3, and we're going to go into this next stitch, but make sure to grab this round that we just did and crochet over it, and we're going to make 2 double crochets. And then in this third one, we're just going to make 1. So we end up with 4 total. And yeah, just make sure that you're crocheting over that area. And then chain 2. And in the next one, we're going to do 1 double crochet. And then 2 in this one. And then 1 in the third one. And then chain 2 again, and we're just going to repeat this, putting 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, 1 double crochet, and then chain 2 all the way around. And again, just like with all the future rounds as well, make sure that this loop and tail are in the front so they don't get trapped behind, and you can kind of crochet over this to hide it. So when you go into the next one, you can just kind of hold it behind there. And once you get to the end of the round, we're just going to chain 2 and slip stitch into that third chain. And now we can just pull this loop again and go back to the other color. Now to start this next round, chain 3, yarn over and insert another double crochet in the same stitch. So now we have 2, and then we're going to chain 5. Once you chain 5, yarn over, and we're going to go into this next stitch in the gap and make 2 double crochets. So that's 1, and then 2, and then chain 5 again, yarn over, and just like always, keep this in the front, and we're going to go into this next stitch and make 2 double crochets. And we're just going to keep repeating this, so doing the chain 5 and then 2 double crochets in each stitch, and just do this all the way around. And once you get to the end of the row and do your chain 5, we're just going to slip stitch into the third chain and then pull up a loop, and we're going to go back to the petal color. Now to start the next round, chain 3, yarn over, and we're going to put 2 double crochets in the next stitch, but don't crochet with this part. We're just going to crochet in the petal stitches. So 2 in that one, and then 1 in the next one, and 1 in the next one. So we're going to end up with 5 total double crochets. And now chain 2, and we're going to do 1 double crochet in the first one, and then 2 in the next one, and then 1 in each of the last 2, and then chain 2, and we're just going to repeat this pattern all the way around. And once you get to the end of the round, we're just going to slip stitch like usual, and we're going to keep going in this petal color. So chain 1 and make a single crochet in that stitch we just slip stitched into, and then yarn over, and we're going to skip 1 stitch and go into this third, and we're going to make 5 double crochets in that stitch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then single crochet in this last stitch. So skip this one and single crochet in that one, and this will be kind of the end of the petal. And now we're just going to slip stitch into each of these 2 chains in the gap, and then single crochet in this first stitch, yarn over, skip this one, and go into the third stitch with 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then skip this one and single crochet in the last one. And then just like before, 2 slip stitches for this gap. And yeah, we're just going to repeat this: single crochet, 5 double crochet, single crochet, and then 2 slip stitches all the way around. Once you slip stitch into these 2 stitches, we can just go into that first stitch we slip stitched into and make 1 last slip stitch. And then once you're done with that, you can just cut the tail. And now we're just going to work in this color. So grab the loop and chain 3. And yarn over, go into the next stitch and make 2 double crochets in there. So now we have a total of 3. And now we're going to chain 1 and yarn over, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, but we're going to insert 5 double crochets in this gap. So insert your hook into this gap that we made with the chains and make 5 double crochets in there. So 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then chain 1, yarn over, and we're going to go back to this gap, and we're going to make 1 double crochet in the first stitch and then 2 in the next one. And we're just going to repeat that. So chain 1, and we're going to insert 5 into this space, and I'm going to carry the tail with me so I don't have to weave it in later, and make 5 double crochets. And once you have 5, go back into the next gap and do 1 double crochet in the first stitch and 2 in the next one. And yeah, just keep repeating this all the way around. And once you finish those last double crochets, slip stitch into the third chain. And now we're going to make the last row in this color. So chain 1, and we're going to slip stitch into this next stitch, and then slip stitch into the one after that, and then we're going to skip this gap and single crochet in the next stitch, and then single crochet in the one after that, and then yarn over, half double crochet in the next one, and then double crochet in the last 2. And then skip this gap, and we're going to make a treble crochet in this stitch. And then we're going to make another one in here, and then chain 3 and make one more in the same stitch. And then make one more treble crochet in the last one. So this is basically creating the corners of the square, and now we're going to do that in reverse. So yarn over, skip this gap, double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next one, half double crochet in the next one, single crochet, single crochet, and then we're going to slip stitch in the last 3. And now we're going to repeat this pattern. So start with 2 single crochets, then a half double crochet, then 2 double crochets, and then 1 treble crochet, and then 1 treble crochet, 3 chains, and another one, and then a treble crochet in the last one. And we're going to do that in reverse and keep repeating this pattern all the way around to get the 4 corners. And once you get to the end of the round, we're just going to slip stitch into that first stitch from the last round. And now we can fasten off in this color. And now for the last step, we're just going to make the border around the square. So grab your border color. I'm just using this off-white, and it doesn't really matter where you start, but I just like to start where I left off. So insert your hook into the stitch and pull the yarn through, and now we can just chain 3, and we're going to make a double crochet in each stitch. So go into the next one and make a double crochet, and into the next one, and into the next one, and make sure to carry those tails behind you, and then the next one, and we're just going to keep double crocheting until we reach this corner here. Once we reach this first corner, we're going to yarn over, go into this gap, and make 2 double crochets, and then chain 2 and make 2 more in the same gap. And this is going to create the corner of our border. And now you can just yarn over and keep doing double crochets in each stitch all the way along the side until you get to the next corner. And once you reach the next corner, we're going to yarn over and do the 2 double crochet, chain 2, and 2 more double crochets. And you're just going to repeat this pattern all the way around until you get back to the beginning. And once you reach the end of the row, we can just slip stitch into that 3rd chain and then fasten off. And there you go, that's the final square. So now the hard part is honestly making 18 of these. So I recommend just rewatching the tutorial a couple times, and eventually you'll honestly memorize it. But yeah, once you make 18 squares, we can move on to the next part. And once you're done with all your squares, we can start sewing them together. So you'll need 9 squares for the front panel and the back panel. And once you have them made, I recommend laying them out in the order you want them sewed, and then we can start sewing. Start sewing, grab the color that you made like the border in, and just cut a nice long piece, and then tie a couple knots at the end. And now you can go ahead and grab your sewing needle and thread the yarn through. And now I'm going to start by showing you guys on 2 squares. So these are the front sides of the squares, but we're going to flip to the back. And we're going to start sewing the edges together. So I recommend starting in one of these chains. We have 2 chains here on the border. I'm just going to start on this one and then save this one for when we're sewing the other side. So I'm going to go into this chain and I'm going to go into the back loop of it, and then same with this one. So the loops that are closest to you. And I'm just going to pull it through. And now we're just going to keep sewing in the back loops. So go into the next stitch. This is the front loop and this is the back loop. So go into that back loop and the back loop of the next one and pull through. And then this is the back loop of that one, and then the back loop of the opposite one. And this is basically just going to conceal the stitches really well, and you won't be able to tell that we sewed it when you flip it to the other side. So just keep sewing in the back loop of each stitch. And once you get to the next corner, just go into this first chain, and this is how the 2 squares will look sewn together. So now, because I sewed from top to bottom, I'm just going to cut this yarn off and then start again on this side to sew these 2 squares together. So I tied a knot in the yarn and I'm just going to cut it off. And now I'm going to repeat this same process and sew these 2 together. And always remember to sew on the back side. And this time I'm going to sew from bottom to top so I can connect these squares as well from the same yarn. Now that I'm done sewing these 3 together, I'm going to start sewing this one to the edge of this one. So just flip it over and do the same thing. So I'm going into this loop and then I'm going to connect it into the loop that we just finished sewing into. So go through the center and pull, and then keep sewing into the back loops all the way across. Now that I finished sewing this square and I reach the edge, I'm just going to tie it off again and then restart on the next square. Now I'm going to sew these 2 to these in one line. So yeah, I'm just going to keep sewing up here and then connect those and sew this gap as well. But yeah, that's basically it. It doesn't really matter what order you sew them in as long as they're securely attached. This is what the squares look like sewn together, and now you're just going to do this for the other side. And once you finish both panels, we can sew them together. So this is the right side of this panel and the right side of that. And just lay them flat so the wrong sides are facing out. And now we can just grab the yarn that we used to make the border and just cut a really long piece of this yarn to sew with. And I'm just going to tie a couple knots on one end and then thread the yarn through your needle. And now we can start sewing. You can start sewing on either side, just make sure you're sewing from the top. So this is going to be the bottom of my bag, so I'm going to start sewing here and go all the way around, across, and then back up. But it doesn't matter if you start on this side or that side. So I'm just going to basically sew it the same way we sewed the squares together, and I'm going to go into this second chain of both gaps and just pull through. And then we're basically just going to be sewing in the back loop of each stitch, just like we did when we were sewing the squares together. So yeah, this honestly doesn't take much instruction. We're basically just doing the same thing that we did to sew these squares together, except we're just sewing down, across, and then back up. I just finished sewing down this side right here, and now I'm just going to keep going all the way along this bottom and back up, and I'll show you guys when I'm done sewing. I just finished sewing all the way around the tote bag, and now I'm just going to tie a couple knots and fasten off. And you can go ahead and just weave in this tail, and then we can move on to the last step. The last step is to make the straps, so I'm just going to flip the tote bag right side out. So we're going to make 2 straps, and they'll basically just be on each side. So we'll sew one around here and then one on the back on that side like that. And yeah, so just grab the color that you made the border in, tie a slip knot on your hook, and we're going to start chaining the width that you want your strap to be. So just chain until you get the width you want. So I did 10 chains, but feel free to make it bigger or smaller, whatever you'd like. And to start the next row, we're going to yarn over and half double crochet in the second chain from the hook. And we're just going to half double crochet in every chain all the way down. And once you get to the end of the row, chain 2, and we're going to turn it over and half double crochet in each stitch. So starting in the first one, and then just keep going. And once you have double crochet across, chain 2 and flip it back. And we're just going to keep making rows of half double crochets until you get the length that you want the strap to be. This is pretty repetitive, but it honestly doesn't take that long. But yeah, so just keep half double crocheting until you get the length you want. Here's what the strap looks like. I didn't count how many rows I did, but it measures approximately 40 inches long. Now to end the strap, I'm just going to do chain 1 and just cut a tail that's long enough to sew the strap to the bag. So I'm going to start sewing on this side, and I'm just going to thread the tail of the strap through my needle. And we're basically just going to be sewing this first side of the strap in the middle of this granny square. So I'm just going to flip it over, and you're going to want to line it up in the middle of the square. It really depends on how wide your strap is, but for me, this stitch is about the middle. So I'm just going to insert my hook in there. And now I'm going to go into the next stitch in both loops and go through both loops of the strap, and then in the next stitch and the next stitch of the bag, and then I'm going to go into the next stitch and the next stitch of the strap right here, and then in this next stitch and the next stitch on the bag. And yeah, you're just going to keep sewing through both loops of the bag and the strap to attach them together. And this is what the bag should look like once you finish sewing this side of the strap. Once you're done here, you can just tie a couple knots and cut the tail, and then just weave in this tail. And now we can sew the other side to the bag. So before you sew, make sure that the strap is completely straight so you don't have any weird twists once you're done sewing. And I forgot to make this tail long enough for sewing when we first started, so I'm just going to cut another piece of yarn to sew it with. But when you're making the second strap, I recommend leaving that tail a little longer so you don't need to attach another piece of yarn. Here is the piece I'm using, and I'm just going to straighten out the strap, and then I'm going to sew it in the same spot that I sewed the first side. So I'm just going to stick my needle through the first stitch of the strap. So this is the stitch in the middle. So I'm just going to stick my needle in there and then start sewing into the next stitch and the next one in the strap. And yeah, I'm just going to keep sewing, and it might be a little confusing to see because of the way I'm holding it, but I'm just holding it this way to make sure that I'm sewing the right side of the strap. And this is what the strap should look like once you're done sewing it. And now we can just go ahead and fasten off and weave in the tails. So this is what the front side of the tote bag looks like. And yeah, now we're just going to repeat this and make another one of these straps and attach it to the other side. And here is the final tote bag. I love how it turned out, and it's honestly the perfect size to bring to work or school because it can fit so many things. I hope you guys are able to follow along with this tutorial. Make sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my Instagram and TikTok for more crochet content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.